inventions or some of the biggest people, in the world, like Henry Ford, you'd probably throughout most of the time that they've tried to do a product or whatever, change the world, you'd call them stubborn. But actually, when it comes to the moment when this project finds its time and changes the world, that's when you say like, oh, that was a persistent.
Many products that come onto the market now, they are not necessarily better, but they might be safer. So they have fewer side effects.
Or do we make the projects more difficult than they have to be sometimes?
Hello. The nature of our little project called the podcast, actually, as the name suggests, normally gets us quite far apart geographically. But there are those unique moments when we actually have the opportunity to be really close and together in wonderful places.
So today we're in the city of Dublin, Ireland, where with this beautiful weather, always cloudy, but fortunately not rainy, we're bringing you this episode today.
Yeah, we'll talk, I hope, around a number of really interesting topics. And as always, probably find a better place to do it, though a bit less movement around. But I hope you're going to enjoy it. This is two poles, actually really not so far apart this time.
So just wanted to say that all the opinions in this podcast are our own and they do not represent the institutions that we're associated with.
I did bring a subject once again, and I wanted to talk to you about, well, the one thing which I quite often call, FUT in any entrepreneurships or FUT in the projects. So what got me to talk about that, Jarek, is for the past few years we're watching like SpaceX, was sending rockets, objects, cars, electric cars into the space, into the orbit, well, in a pace that I've never seen before. I mean, I've been used to the space shuttles, to basically NASA sending quite a, being the main force of driving that, and it always looked like a very difficult project. It still is for SpaceX. Yeah. However, though, it does look much more easier now. I mean, if you look at some of those rockets going up and actually the size of a rocket coming down and, basically landing vertically on a little platform on the thing, it looks like a computer game. And that's where it got me to thinking around, do we put too much, fat, or do we make the projects more difficult than they have to be sometimes?
So it's not even more difficult. I would say it's like, is everything around the projects necessary to complete them?
Yes.
And the obvious answer is no. However, it's sometimes there are those simple projects that we have a goal of achieving something and we're getting to that goal and that's it. Sometimes, and with like space exploration, or you mentioned NASA, it's not just going into space, but there are many kind of side things that were developed during the project. Mm-hmm. So it's not just for the space exploration, but we had some things that were developed for the popular consumption.
Okay.
And I would have to think about the exact examples of that. Uh-huh. But in a sense, this kind of the side effects of this, maybe sometimes overblown in terms of the money and time projects, they produce other things that are useful.
Okay.
So it's, we wish it was always so simple to say, okay, we have this project, we have amount X,
yes,
pun intended, here with the SpaceX, and we complete the project for X. It's never the case.
All right.
But I guess the question is it 2X or is it 10 times X, the amount of time and money that was spent on those projects?
Yeah. Because being in the area of rockets as well, I saw it on the internet somewhere, the explanation of why is it so important not to put too many kilograms on, or any space rocket shuttle or whatever, because you don't, for every kilogram of that mass that you're putting onto and want to send it to the orbit, you need to put obviously the fuel to get it up there. But you don't only have to put the fuel for that kilogram, you have to put the fuel to put the weight of the fuel for that kilogram as well. So it almost goes, maybe not exponentially, but it goes in, you know, whatever you start to add to a project. It's a great metaphor for me. Like the more you start to put elements through it, the more governance, the more control, the more, well, admin or whatever we call it. I guess in the business world, admin is the big thing, which is starting to, well, drag you down really.
So with that, actually, I might bounce it back to you. You have a lot of experience with cars and racing cars, and so again, this lowering the weight, even with the same power of the engine, and so on. Maybe you can tell us from your experience, you know, that's because we are not space, like rockets experts, but you know, can you tell us a bit from your personal experience?
It is a good example because I mean I did some rallying, not racing, but on tarmac, which is similar for all of the cars fans. I'm just trying to make it really clear. And it is true that weight is really important and everyone will want to get the weight out. But there's the question of power, which in our metaphor, I guess it's, I don't know, the expertise or the money or the controls or whatever else that we care about, is at certain level as important, but sometimes actually even more. So even if, it depends on the scale, I guess, again, you get to a point, and I guess it's a good outcome that we're getting through as well. You can only, so getting half a ton out of a 2-ton car or a 1.5 car obviously is going to make a massive difference. Getting another 300 or another 100 or whatever then starts to be, well, almost impossible, or you have to actually start the space technology start to put at it to put to it as well. But then if you take half of a ton from a car which is 1.5 ton, or you're gonna add twice the power, you're probably still better with twice the power. You're gonna go on corners a little bit slower, but then, you know, it's just gonna disappear on the straights. And then again, it depends on the course. So it depends on the project.
So this is actually a great point that you are making about the cost, because yes, we have now the technology that even the cars like regularly that we drive, they could be made really, we couldn't destroy them. So in accidents, we could make them like 99.999% safe.
Absolutely.
Again, is the cost.
Yes.
And then what you are saying, and I'm going back to the SpaceX, yes, is the kilogram of weight and so on, but we don't want to make them unsafe. So it's all these things that go into the project. So it's not, and in some of them, of course, safety is always important. However, should we improve safety by like very marginal amount, but spend twice the amount of money on that versus, you know, everything is risky.
Absolutely.
Yes. So all of those things going into the project, I think, going really back to the beginning of the conversation with NASA or with government projects, I think safety and kind of dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's is like of preeminent importance. I'm not saying that for SpaceX, it's not, but I think this balance or the emphasis, it's maybe the weights of the emphasis are a bit different, because if you're a business, you really have to care about the expenses. I'm not saying government doesn't. However, we can always tax people more, versus if you are a company, well, you still have to make a profit.
It's a good point. Do you think it's also, I guess, I wouldn't want to say reputation, but let's say the leadership style or the character of who's, well, basically running, or what the organization is actually speaking of has a big thing. Because I'll tell you, I mean, coming back to the racing world, and you're saying about the safety, there was a very famous battle in rallying, again, world rallying, between an Italian brand and a German brand. And the German brand came up with a 4-wheel drive at that time, so it was basically just winning everything. And there was a very famous driver called Walter Roll, a German driver, a genius behind the wheel. He already was sort of a half retired. He didn't really want to do it, and he went to the Italian brand to drive it. And they made a car that was rear-wheel drive, which was at this time, everyone just looking at them saying, look, you can't do it. And if you know racing or rallying or sports cars or any sport right now, if you're behind on technology, basically lost now. But what he did, there was a famous interview with him, and that's where I come to the character of the driver or the leadership or the organization itself. There was a famous interview he done that the family asked him when he signed up for that Italian brand. I said, like, those cars are very light, but at the same time, people were making jokes that the roll cage is made of like paper or something like that. So they were really considered not safe, whether they were or not, but they were really fragile. And they asked him, "Are you not, you're not afraid you're going to die? I mean, this is a dangerous sport." And at that time, that was 80, I think 3 or 6, I can't remember now, but in the 80s. And he said, "Well, no, because I don't intend to crash." So I guess, if I look at it, it brings me nicely to the SpaceX versus NASA versus the European space agencies, that it's probably when a rocket crashes and it has a SpaceX logo on it, it's probably read completely different by the public than if a NASA rocket gets has a problem or something like that. And I think there is a problem right now. I don't know the details.
Yeah, there is a problem. And actually SpaceX is coming to the rescue,
Yes.
which is kind of, it's almost, I'm not saying funny, but it's almost like a dark humor that, the biggest agency still in the world, NASA, is asking like this company to help to bring the astronauts back to Earth. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Coming back to I guess we're talking about the different, where my mind is going right now. Obviously, it all depends on the road that you go in. It all depends, and then the controls or what I call fat in the processes. My sort of answer to that bit is, and to a equation that I always try to get as a simple answer is getting the right control for the right, I guess, elements or environment that you can work in it, starting from the objective and what you're trying to achieve, starting from the history, but actually the people you're having, the team, the sort of, or even risk, like you said, around that. And you can probably tell by now, Jarek, I'm not a massively organized person. I'm not what you would call as a control freak person. I'm more I can see you laughing now, but I'm more into the new. I get bored quite quickly. I get into projects and things like that. So having and changing and controlling every single little screw and every single little bolt in a machine is not my type of a thing. And I run projects, successful projects as well. So I'm trying to limit the control to an absolute minimum. And
are you trying to say that you are a big thinker?
No, I wouldn't risk that sentence. No, I wouldn't risk that statement for sure. Where I think I'm trying to get, Jarek, is that, and that's what I wanted to actually check with some of the big projects you're doing and some of the complicated and equations you're trying to solve in your world with your research and bits, is like, I think the best solution for it is have the minimum viable amount of control to a risk or the environment you're actually trying to do. So for me, an objective of a project should also be to limit what I call the fat, so all of the things which are around it, to an absolute minimum viable level that gets you to a desired level. And now, if it's a new drug, a medicine, or a new medication, that fat might be actually the minimum viable product might be very, very high. if it's I don't know, if it's a podcast with your cousin to talk about that, maybe it needs a bit less because it's a bit more fun and leisure.
Yeah, so it's this balances of risk, however we define risk, versus what do we need to put around a project, a product we want to develop, and so on. So yeah, I can give you an example that it's I say, how do I fund my research? So it would be nice to say, oh, I work at the university, everything is paid for, I can think about whatever I want and do whatever I like.
Is that how it looks?
That maybe looks like that from outside, but actually, if I really want to make some progress, I need to get some money from funders. And for me, it's a specific field that I work with. It's mostly National Institutes of Health in US. It's an organization that funds a lot of medical research in US, where funding goes into like tens of billions of dollars per year. So basically I apply for a grant, so I put a grant application in and I'm saying, okay, I want to do ABCD. The nice thing about that is, as long as I don't do, X, Y, and Z, and I still do something, let's say A, B, and maybe B on the way to C, or maybe E that's connected to D, it's okay. As long as this money is spent on kind of the general purpose of research.
Okay. So if you don't go out of, just to try to understand, you're not going to go out of the scope of the research too much. You're not going to go into some different areas.
Sometimes the thing is, the one thing I have to say, the big difference between like the business world and academic world is usually slower. So let's say I put this grant application in today. By the time I get the funding, it might be in a year and a half. The research moved. It's not only my research, but research of others. So what I proposed might be maybe not outdated, but I can introduce new elements into that research. So in a sense, what I'm doing, it's not that I said, okay, I will do A, and I do A because somebody else might have done half of A.
Right.
I might have done another half of A, and this is done. So I move on.
Okay.
But the money that I get, and if I get it in a more or less continuous fashion, I can continue my research. I can the starting point, you always have to wait. But then you can continue that with the continuing funding.
Fair enough. So and it's actually true, because if you think about it, in today's volatile kind of a fast-paced world, things are changing. So have you ever had a project that you actually had to cancel in the middle because it sort of got?
No, so it's not about canceling. It's just about doing something else. Usually building on what has been done.
Okay.
And again, in business world, this would be like, somebody introduces a product and you were developing something very similar. And it's like, okay, if I introduce that to the market, I don't have much of a chance, or I have to make some modifications to either make it better, cheaper, or safer.
Right.
In the in drug industry now, in the drugs for medications, many products that come onto the market now, they are not necessarily better, but they might be safer. So they have fewer side effects. So these breakthroughs that we might have had a few decades ago, they're at least not happening at the pace that they were happening then. But again, I would rather take a medication, a drug that has 2 side effects, not 5 side effects. Yeah?
Of course. It is an interesting thought, because you do have. I had I couldn't even probably list the number of projects that I just had to stop. And maybe it's not the technology that has changed in this matter, but more the assumptions or the objective is changing in a way, or the situation around you, the environment has changed so much that actually all of those bits that we wanted to achieve at the beginning now become a bit less important. There's actually...
Before you go into that, I have a quick question. Would you say you have more short-term projects than kind of long, like when I say short term, like, you know, a few months up to a year versus kind of very long, like 4 or 5 year projects?
Definitely, but that's coming from a different angle. I mean, the longer projects in the business are usually the more strategic, more costly project, and they just take longer to do it. For example, if I want to build a I don't know, a part of a factory, I want to put an automation. It's just, you know, the limitations around the lead times, and the actual money and the gathering and the approving just takes longer, and it needs to be a bit more strategical. If I could, you know, put a automated warehouse tomorrow and I have a business case for it, oh yeah, I'd love to do that and do it. But yeah, there's definitely many more shorter projects all around the different functions in the business that are happening. However, they should be all aiming, at least try to aim to the longer term goals. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But the thing I wanted to mention around stopping a project while I'm talking, there's a I did my MBA a few years ago, and we had this simulation game when we were doing we were running well, actually a shoe producer and a seller company. We were putting we had our businesses and we were simulating it in a predetermined computer program, and we've invested quite a lot of money in the game with our group in the like Six Sigma, continuous improvement, lean manufacturing, all of those things which I pretty much live and breathe every day. And then the situation changed, and one of the simulated factories, which was somewhere, I can't remember where, South America, when we invested that much effort and all of that sort of money, which was paying off really well at a certain point. Now, some of the tax implications or customs or whatever changed, and we kept that factory going just to, because we almost had like a relationship with this, you know, made up business that we had over there, just because of all of the sunk costs that we have over there. And quite often, you know, this is where you land as well, that you know, you're so into a project or you're so much into it and you're going through it.
It's also psychological. That, you know, if you put already so much effort and money into something, you don't want to stop it. So it's actually the point that we were kind of going to this kind of persistence versus stubbornness.
Yes.
And where is the kind of the line between them, or the border or something? And I think it's very hard to define.
I think so. Yeah.
So let me give you one example I have from like my world. I was working with some colleagues, especially with one of them. We were trying to get some money from the NIH, from the National Institutes of Health, to do our research. And we put one grant application in. It was evaluated pretty well. And with those applications, you can resubmit it. So you make certain changes, and then hopefully you make changes for the better. So you hope it will be evaluated better and you'll get the funding. So that's what we did. And we almost got it. But as you were saying with the factory, in this simulated example, there are external factors that we cannot control. And this was around the time 2007, 2008, where all the crisis was happening with the financial markets and so on, and that affected the governments as well. So in US, there was almost like not a stop to research, but it was the money going to research was severely cut. And in normal situation, we would have gotten the funding, but we didn't because of the external factors that we couldn't control.
Okay.
So then we were like, okay, should we stop or should we do it again? So we applied for we put another grant application in. Still nothing. So that, you might say, it borders on the kind of stubbornness that we were too stubborn. We still wanted to pursue the idea. However, from the scientific evaluation, we knew the ideas are good because they're evaluated in a kind of at the high level, it's just not quite there. So then we said, we're applying for not huge amounts of money. So then we said, let's go for broke. Let's apply for a big grant, big amount of money. And that got funded on the first submission.
Oh, here you go.
So it's like, we thought we are going into the stubbornness territory, but it was actually persistence.
Well, yeah, here you go. And I actually, the moment you've actually mentioned that as well, some of the biggest inventions or some of the biggest people, in the world, like Henry Ford, you'd probably throughout most of the time that they've tried to do a product or whatever, change the world, you'd call them stubborn. But actually, when it comes to the moment when this project finds its time and changes the world, that's when you say like, oh, that was a persistent.
Yeah, but this is this is like the predicting the past. It's like it's perfect, yes. Yeah. But if you are in a situation on for one person like Ford or Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, you have hundreds of people who are stubborn, and we never heard about them because their products were not successful. Yeah? So it's again, we only hear those good stories. Yes,
true.
So even with like very small example that I gave you with our grant applications, there are many people who apply and they apply 2-3 times and they don't get the money. Now, on that, I have to tell you, and this is something I did analysis when at my institution, where I looked actually at success rates in those grant applications for all the faculty members at my school. And the amazing thing for me was that majority of the people, they did it once, they were not successful, and they said, okay, not doing it again. But even the most successful people, they needed to have like 4, 5, 6, or even more tries to get some money. And especially if you are a junior person, and you get this rejection, it's very humbling. Yes, you're saying, well, I'm not good enough. I shouldn't do it again. But giving this example, and I found it kind of serving in some administrative roles, giving these examples to, especially to junior people, you just have to try again. And it won't happen on the first, second time, but at some point it might. It's not guaranteed. But the work you put in, you have, you increase your chance of success, especially when you learn from the rejections.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think this is, again, we've talked about it in one of our previous episodes about the safe space and the area to fail, and I strongly believe, obviously to a degree, that there needs to be a space for that, especially for junior specialists or in your world, people that are just going into the world of their career to make sure that they learn to fail in the right way as well. No, that's a good point.
And to use this word fail, I can't remember now. There was one of the very successful entrepreneurs who was interviewed, and the question was, it's kind of the usual question of reporters: what have you learned when you failed? And the answer was, I never failed.
Okay.
Because this person was treating that as a learning experience. They didn't think about something about as a failure. It was actually, it didn't work, but I learned from it. Yes.
If you find the topics in the discussion interesting, please do subscribe and push the subscribe button, because that will allow us to make many more interesting subjects into our conversation.
Yeah, we will have guests, we will have, we'll talk about other interesting topics, so let us know. What do you think?
Let us know what you think and push that button, please.